Hello, and welcome to something a little bit different today. We're going to talk about some of my favorite army lists in Infinity N5 so far. So, what's in this video? Well, we're going to talk through 6 of my favorite lists in the edition so far. Every list that I'm going to show off today has been at least a little bit field tested. They are not theoretical, but they are also not necessarily good lists. Now, all of them are absolutely playable. I would feel comfortable taking any of these to like at least a small local event, maybe even a larger interstate one. But the reason why they are my favorites is that they do something fun or interesting in the first instance, and then usually are tweaked to be competitive and strong in the second instance, in order to produce that wonderful mix of a little bit of a meme but with a razor's edge. And so, in that vein, while I would comfortably recommend any of these as a play experience, more or less, just be aware that a list being one of my favorites in the edition so far does not automatically make it a list that you could take to a major event and necessarily smash with. But I do guarantee that they'll be at least somewhat fun. Quick note, list codes for all of these will be in the pinned comment below the video description. I did actually take the time this time around to get list codes for every one of these lists, so you'll be able to load them into Infinity Army if you want to. Finally, I make no apologies for any of the list names presented in this video, and with that note, let's jump into the first of 6. Now, these are presented in something resembling reverse order of sensibility. So this is the most sensible of the 6 lists we'll be looking at, and it is pretty sensible, but it grew out of a bunch of experiments I've done with Imperial Service to find things that I like. And broadly, I would make the observation that there's actually a lot in Imperial Service to like, but a particular pairing of mine that I really enjoy is the Dakini and Deva duo. You can see that there in Combat Group 1. That's a Deva Killer Hacker and a Dakini Heavy Machine Gun. It's relatively SWC light. You get pure duo bonuses, and one of the reasons why it's so valuable in Imperial Service is that they're otherwise kind of looking a little bit for a payoff Killer Hacker. You can get ample KHDs in Imperial Service, but none of them are really as high quality as the Deva. And because it's a faction that does have good access to linked pitches, having a killer hacker to capitalize on dropping pitches on enemy heads is really useful. So the list started with the Deva and Dakini duo, and then kind of just grew from there. I made changes over time. I've played sort of several iterations of ISS, and this version is trying to make maximum use of an Evo hacker for supportware, plus just a ton of other pieces that kind of hit that wonderful halfway mark between cool and very powerful. So the list from top to bottom starts with a Koga Ninja Mine Layer. There are 2 of these, 1 in each group. I think I've settled on the Koga Ninja Mine Layer as my preferred profile. Having the 3rd camo marker and the mine is just extremely valuable. Koga Ninjas are specialists natively, and if I don't make them killer hackers, they aren't vulnerable to enemy killer hackers. They're also fast, exceptional melee combatants, and the fact that they've got that Ballistic Skill 12 Burst 3 EM carbine allows for plays where you just move those guys forward, and if your opponent dares to discover them, the threat of that just Ballistic Skill attack is really high. I have started getting to the point with Koga Ninjas where I learn where to make the Ballistic Skill attack on the approach, and you can do some serious work, even against multiple targets, where you drop the surprise to make the Burst 3 attack and then start hitting things in close combat. We then have a Celestial Guard Monitor with 2 Quang Shi and Crane rank agent Adil Mamut as the lieutenant. Now, Adil can join any of these fire teams. He will sometimes be with the Celestial Guard and Quang Shi. He will sometimes be with the Deva and Dakini. You could theoretically also run him solo, but he does benefit from being in a fire team. But don't be afraid to spend his lieutenant order to break him out, particularly if it's kind of like a free order and he'll rejoin the link team at the end of the turn. He's another one of those pieces, a little bit like a Koga Ninja, where, yes, not cheap, but he does so much that there's almost always something he can do in a turn that is cool and interesting and fun. And because we've got an Evo Hacker baggage bot in this list, you can really be very free with those disco balls if you need to, which means this list has loads of visibility control. We then have the Deva KHD and the Dakini Heavy Machine Gun as mentioned. This is one of the 2 teams that Adil can join. And the Dakini has supportware on hand from the Pangalung Evo Hacker. We've then got a Husong Yaokong, that's the +1 Burst Thunderbolt Total Reaction Bot, and an Engineer and a Helper Bot. One of the things I've found with Imperial Service is that you do have a really nice soft defense, right? You've got things like Quang Shis for templates, you've got the Koga Ninjas and their minefields, and that buys you a fair bit of time, but it is really nice to be able to interleaven that with a proper, like, moderately solid hard ARO piece, and a Thunderbolt Total Reaction Bot plus an Engineer is a really good just additional layer particularly if you're facing something like enemy pitchers and you want to just pin them back and force your opponent to take a fair gunfight before they can start doing all of their hacker shenanigans. Combat Group 2 is then another collection of things that I really like in Imperial Service. We have the second Koga Ninja, a Rushi MSV2 Spitfire. You combine this with the Celestial Guard Quangxi smoke grenades to get smoke shooting with marksmanship from the Evo hacker. You do have to choose, right? It's either going to be the Dakini or the Rushi, generally speaking, that will get support wear. But the Rushi in particular is its own repeater, so you can always just at any time switch over to the Rushi if maybe you start with support wear on the Dakini. Both of them benefit from a lot, but both are also just about good enough gunfighters under the right circumstances to not strictly need the support wear up if you've got no other choice. The Dakini is going to be effectively burst fire with Imitism, the Rushi is an MSV2 shooting through smoke, so the support wear is just the icing on top there to really push them in terms of lethality. We then have a duo that I really love. This is just the support duo in Imperial Service, where you have a Pheasant Agent Minelayer and a Zanying Hacker Zero Pain with Pitcher. Those are a pure duo and they want to just hang out near the Evo hacker and just spam out material. In a given turn, you could lay multiple mad traps and fire multiple pitches and then reload. They're a great outlet for spare orders, particularly if the Rushi doesn't have anything to do this turn, and they just bring a bunch of value. We then have a Dragon Lord. Yeah, he's 5 points. You could easily make this a War Correspondent if you needed to save a couple of points, but the list doesn't need to save a couple of points. So that gives us overall multiple solid gunfighting pieces, a very solid midfield, some very good close combat, good visibility control, okay hacking. One of the things this list has, it is notable, is just a single regular hacker and a single killer hacker. So fitting something like, for example, a generic Celestial Guard hacker just to round out the hacking presence wouldn't be bad if you could find the points. But overall, it's just a really nice mix of capabilities, and this to me is where I'm landing in terms of about half of my Imperial Service lists. The other half of my Imperial Service lists are leaning more towards sharp tip of the spear kind of stuff, Sujans for example. But this list is a much more dispersed force kind of list, where a great deal of the 15 troopers I have access to are designed to be able to do something in any given circumstance, and that's the kind of list I personally really like. In terms of some changes you could make to this list if you wanted to tinker, it would be very interesting to try and fit any of a Jin Yao, the drop unit, a Luduan, or possibly a second Rushi with Mind Dispenser. Mind Dispenser is just another thing that can benefit from baggage. And you could feasibly find points for any number of those by cutting the Husong Yaokong, and then find SWC if you need it by maybe trimming one of the Koga ninjas back down. But this is a list overall that is good, solid, sensible, has tons of fun pieces, and I will absolutely be playing a bunch more games with in future. Up next, and our second most sensible list of the video, we have our Morat Aggression Force list. Now, the kind of reason for being for this list is to really push just how far Morats can take low SWC options to fit like everything you might possibly want in terms of a list that would normally cost you SWC in each case. And so the starting points there are firstly the Sogarat Feuerbach Lieutenant. This is just a fantastic piece. Yes, 56 points is not cheap, but you basically get a tag level character. He's very durable, he has very dangerous gunfighting, he has a disco ball which is really useful, plus all of the usual benefits of being a Morat in a Morat list, so he's immune to isolation himself and is in a list full of warhorses. But most importantly, he is a proper big gun that only costs half an SWC. Jumping into the first combat group, we can then see a Rodok fire team. So we have a Rodok Thunderbolt +1 burst, a Rodok Hacker, and a Krakot Renegade, and this is 0 SWC for a long-range effective burst 4 gun and a Hacker with Trinity. Both of those are things that you would often expect to pay SWC for, but so far in the list we have spent half an SWC total. And that lets us fit 2 proper 1.5 SWC guns, and 2 more hackers, and a guided missile launcher even, and only hit 6 SWC, which is really, really cool. So from top to bottom, obviously we've mentioned the Sogarat and the Rodok fire team. The Rodoks are very enjoyable to play. Now, Ballistic Skill 12 is a little bit of a limiter, but they do have Mimetism, and despite the slightly mixed speeds in the link, Rodok jumps 7 inches and Krakot jump 8, all of which have super jump. Now, despite everything in that team being single wound, this is just a really fun team to use. They are very mobile, they can just bounce all over the place, and all of them have something going on that just makes them great at capitalizing at that mobility. The Rodok Thunderbolt, you can take long shots that you can get because of the jump mobility. Good rule of thumb is not to take a fight that you can't win, but Ballistic Seal 12 Burst for Effective and Mimetism is plenty good for picking on plenty of stuff in the game, particularly with a Thunderbolt's range bands. We then have the Hacker. Now, he's a Warhorse BTS 6 hacker with Trinity, with all of the regular hacking programs, and a boarding shotgun. The boarding shotgun can be used at close range, burst 2 plus 1 special die, with Mimetism and Ballistic Seal 12 is totally fine. And then one of the things I changed about this list, one of the last changes that I made, was cutting a single Datarazi, this list previously ran 2, and adding in that Krakot Renegade. That Krakot joins the Rodok Fire team, doesn't add to link bonuses, but doesn't need to, and has just consistently delivered so much value because the Rodoks want to move forward and do things, which means they're delivering the Krakot for free, and Krakots are cracked in this edition. They've got metachemistry with reroll, and basically every metachemistry roll on the table just about is good. They've got native ballistic seal attack +1 burst with the chain rifle, chest mines, grenades, and heavy pistol, which means that if you need to, you are burst 3 +1 special die around the corner with that heavy pistol, for example, or burst 2 +1 with the grenades if you've rolled up Fizz +3. Which means at close range, you can be firing a template, an impact template, circular template weapon with 2 dice +1 special die on 19s if you catch someone in close range and rolled the right metachemistry. They're spec fire potentially, and they're very solid in close combat. Mostly they're making one-way trips, right, forking the close combat and the chain rifles. But you can combine the Berserk +3 and the chest mine if you need to get to CC 29. So they're also good enough to just punch their way through targets if they have to. This is like not an expensive team. The Rodok are not cheap, but they're quite like relative to what you get, they're very worthwhile. And the Krakot Renegade is just the cherry on top. We then have a second 3-person team of a Yaugat Spitfire, a Dartok FTO, and a Rindak. Now, one of the things to note about this list is that it does not have the Suryat heavy rocket launcher in it. Over multiple testing games, what I found was that the Suryat is a well-rounded piece. It can do a little bit of ARO work, it can do a little bit of active turn work, and it is, of course, a heavy infantry, but it's just a bit more expensive than, for example, the Yaugat. And the thing about the Yaugat Spitfire is that in terms of doing that thing where you take fights that you can win, there is smoke in this, plenty of smoke in this list because you have one Datarazi and one Osnat. You can do just a bunch of MSV smoke shooting and be much more effective in active turn with the cheaper Yaugat if you're willing to give up the durability and ARO presence of the Suryat. And that was just something I found more interesting, and this is the big thing, taking the Yaugat Spitfire over the Suryat heavy rocket launcher freed up just enough points to turn a Kaitok into a Rindak. And the Rindak is just a really fun and useful piece to play. It is perishingly difficult to kill. I've had it toilet bowl entire opponent turns where they've tried to shoot it and it just sits there dodging, and it has dodge +3 and dodge -3 and it's durable, etc. And as long as the Rindak is around, the fact that you're running all of these single wound pieces is just sort of like less of an issue. Now, virtually nothing in the list has shock immune, but also a lot of things have enough armor that if you're facing multi-weapons, people will usually default to AP rounds, so you do tend to leave bodies that the Rindak's very good at picking back up. It's also a very solid specialist, it rounds out the list specialist coverage, etc. Just really fun to play. So, Rindak, Yaugat, Dartok. The Dartok is one of 2. Those are pitchers. We have 3 hackers, all of which have hacking devices with Trinity. Now, the willpower in the list is not particularly high, it's 13 across the board, but if you have a firewall bonus and you're rolling in with Trinity, that's ample in order to deal with enemy targets. Like most of the time, that's enough to deal with enemy hackers that you might be going after, and then you just leave the pitchers in play and you make them your opponent's problem. Active turn GML plays with this list are not fantastic because willpower 13 when you're trying to spotlight does tend to run out of steam pretty quickly. But because you have 3 hackers, every pitcher that you place means 3 hacking AROs through that pitcher if your opponent goes to try and destroy it inside its zone of control. And at that point, the possibility of ARO spotlights that then make subsequent active turn guided missile plays like live, that becomes your opponent's problem. And it becomes just this really annoying issue for your opponent to have to unpick. And that's something that we can afford despite the list having 4 solid long range guns and all of these hackers because of all of the SWC discounts we get here. We then have the T-Drone guided missiles, an Osnat FTO with 2 Garkis. The smoke grenade launcher is present here because I basically want this fire team to just kind of sit in the rear with the gear, firing long range smoke wherever I need to support the Datarazi, for example. This is not really an assault team. But the Garkis become regular and are very cheap. They start allowing like other stuff to happen in this list. Mostly what this list does is just fire long-range smoke. The second combat group, we then have a Nicodron for baggage because we have 2 pitches and a disco ball. It's very useful. A single Datarazi who will usually support probably the more active, the the Spitfire Yaugat team. That also means that Datarazzi is likely to be nearby the Rindak if the Datarazzi goes down. Datarazzi are very easy to recover with a paramedic because their fizz is so high. And then finally we have the Sogarat and a second Yaugat and Dartok team. So this is a duo. This is the +1 burst multi-sniper and another Dartok hacker with pitcher, etc. So this is one of those lists that you could basically play in literally any scenario in the game, even ones that otherwise require a fair bit of specialization. Like, you might not play this in highly classified, but it would be very easy to play in countermeasures. You could even play this in biotech vor if you absolutely had to. You would probably end up leaving a couple of things behind, but it has so many fire teams that you can get basically everything forward if you need to. It's a really well-rounded list, but it also does stuff that's kind of like non-Morat-y. Historically, you would struggle to get Morats that have all of this stuff happening. Right, I have very fond memories of both N3 and N4 Morats, but even N4 Morats had to be very judicious with their hacking packages. The SWC costs on everything in N4 added up really quickly, and here we are in N5 in the Promised Land, where, yes, we don't have full 5-man links anymore, we no longer have ballistic skill 15 Yaugat snipers, we no longer have ballistic skill 16 Suryats, so really Morats very much do feel like the faction of ballistic skill 13 or maybe 14. That's part of why I'm using so many Yaugats, is that I only want to take face-to-face rolls in active turn that I have a really good chance of winning, and smoke shooting gives me that chance. But with that caveat, the capacity, like just the number of things you can do in this list is so high that it is one of my favorites in N5 so far. Now, next up, we have Hassin Baram, and this list is my take on making use of all of the really cool ambush stuff that you can get in Hassin Baram in N5 without going really all in on that as a tactic. I have actually played a few versions of the list where it's nothing but ambush tactics. And while it is absolutely true that that list is really powerful, it's also, for lack of a better word, sufficiently non-traditional that to play that list, you have to really spend time with it and learn how different it is to how Infinity has played for like most of the last edition and a half. And I am enough of a faction butterfly that I don't usually have time to do that. I dabble with kind of like every faction more or less over time. And the full like double AR, double Shujay package is one where you really need to sit down and play multiple games with it and master it, because it does not play quite like other lists in the game. And so this list is a list that makes use of quite a lot of those pieces, but it makes just enough sacrifices to have a combat group 1 that I can actually stick the boot in with. Multiple offensive elements that can form different, usually it's aiming to form 3 different fire teams, and it has my beloved Asawira duo. Now, canny readers might say, oh, Rob, you can't form a duo of Asawira. They are wildcards only. Yes, you're absolutely correct. They start the game as a 3-person Ghulam Haris with the Ghulam Lieutenant, and then the Ghulam Lieutenant just leaves, possibly even spending his Lieutenant order and just walking away, leaving a Ghulam Haris team comprised only of 2 Asawira, at which point they can just go forth and conquer. Now, Frenzy does mean they tend to be a one-turn, one-way trip kind of team, despite being expensive, so I will usually leave them their attack run. Maybe they'll move forward a little in turn 1, and it won't be until turn 2 that they really, like, aggress. But the burst 5 effective AP Spitfire, and then especially, right, the Disco Ball boarding shotgun +1 burst means you're rolling around a corner, usually firing 4 dice effective on 20s. Especially that boarding shotgun Asawira just cleans up once it finds a line toward the enemy. And so that tip of the spear is supported by a couple of smaller utility fire teams. We have Layla Sharif and a Govad. The Govad just offers a little bit of direct long-range fire. It's ballistic skill 13, it's an MSV1, it's a warhorse, it is a good enough gunfighter for some light suppression when you don't want to try and lay smoke. And Layla Sharif, she gives duo bonuses, so she herself has the shock marksman rifle if you really need it. More importantly though, she is a hacker that ignores stealth. Now she's a killer hacker with Carbonite, so she doesn't have Spotlight, but she otherwise threatens basically everything, which is very useful, particularly in this ITS season, where all factions have at least some access to stealth. We then have a little Ghulam utility team, so this is going to be 1 3-person Ghulam Core, 1 3-person Ghulam Haris, and then a 2-person Baram fire team. And so the second little Haris team is a Ghulam NCO, a Bereed hacker, and a Bereed killer hacker. Now, just to note, you can absolutely switch the location of the Ghulams. You can have the Ghulam lieutenant hang out with the Bereeds and have the Ghulam NCO actually stay with the Asawira using NCO to help them propel up the field. Just whatever, mix and match, right? Whatever works. You can even, if you want to, just form a full team of Layla Sharif and Govad and two Asawira and a Ghulam. Like, that's a legal 5-person Ghulam corps. Very much pick and mix, but I like the support fire team. That Bareed team, it just hangs out in the rear with the gear, it fires out pitches, it reloads each turn, it just sets up a hacking network that is really annoying for your opponent to deal with, and the Ghulam NCO can do the same thing, fire off smoke support for forward-moving teams as needed. We then have a single Dalami and a Camille, which gives us a 10-order group without anything hidden in it, right? So it can just push forward with the full power of those 10 orders plus the NCO order, while the second group does all of the ambush work. And so the second group appears at the beginning of the game as one Dalami and one Mutawiya. That means 2 irregular orders, which technically means you can't have orders stripped from it, because all of the regular orders in that group are hidden and will usually stay hidden until an opportune moment. We have 2 Shujay mine layers. They lay a pair of EM mines each, and will usually drop out of ARO to fire off a Flamen Spear, right? So they'll drop out of hidden to ARO to fire a Flamen Spear, or they will appear in my active turn and move forward and try and press buttons. And the AR is often going to be the reserve drop because it needs to drop down exactly where it can appear and take a triangulated shot at long range with either the AP rifle or more likely the emitter. Now, this second combat group is very order light, right? You start the game, if you're making full use of hidden deployment with just those irregulars, you have to be really judicious about activating this anything in this team. You'll often need to reserve command tokens just to get a second order with any of those pieces, and you might even at certain times consider beginning the game, if you're going first, with the Shujay actually just deployed and not in hiding, if you think you're really going to need the active turn orders to accomplish anything, for example with the AR. Now, for me, that's a very intentional limitation because I want to have that whole first combat group to still do all of the things that I like doing with Hassin Baram from my N4 muscle memory. And so I'm accepting kind of a more limited, particularly offensive potential out of my ambush pieces in order to quarantine them all in group 2 where they can't fuck up my order pool by being hidden until they arrive. That is just a personal adaptation to allow this list to feel a bit more like a normal Infinity list and a bit less like the hyper-specialized ambush assassins, even though the overall higher ceiling would probably be learning how to play proper ambush assassins. Now, in terms of ways that you could flex this list, you could absolutely trim the ambush package down even further, maybe exchange a Shujay for a Assassin Fide. Fides are still very solid in this edition. And if you have any way to free up points, you can absolutely replace the Daylami with Mutawiya. Any Mutawiya with a jammer and smoke grenades, these are very useful pieces. They can actually be a bit more consistent and a bit better at the defense than Dalami can. Dalami are a little bit hit and miss. In this case, it's really just that the points lined up a bit more cleanly to that clean 300. But I would be absolutely fine and possibly even frankly recommend exchanging both Camo Dalami for 8-point Matawiya with boarding shotgun, smoke grenades, and jammers. That gives you 3 jammers in the list. You do still have baggage, so you can reload at least some of them. The boarding shotgun is not as good as it used to be on the Matawiya because you have to actually take a face-to-face roll. And with an impetuous model, that's a little bit more challenging to do, but it's 8 points for a jammer and smoke grenades. Like, there's a limit to how much you can complain about that. So consider that as an adaptation. Consider exchanging one of the Shujay potentially for a Fide to shift even more back toward traditional Assassins. And with those spare points, otherwise, you can consider exchanging an Asawira Disco Ball for the Asawira Doctor. That's only about 3 points more expensive, and you do lose access to the disco, which can be kind of significant in certain matchups because the long-range firepower in this list is pretty limited. But there will absolutely be scenarios where just having a specialist in the Asawira team pays dividends. Maybe you're playing supplies, maybe you're playing provisioning, maybe you are playing countermeasures, for example. Just a little bit of value in having this aggressive 2-person heavy infantry team be able to press buttons. Overall, though, this is a Hassin Baram list that I really enjoy, but it comes with the caveat that it's kind of a training wheels list that is a halfway house for me, the faction butterfly, to play the cool ambush stuff from Hassin Baram without having to fully commit to learning it, because I don't have the time to fully commit to learning it. Next up, we have operations subsection, and this is a list. This is the most pile of cards list that I have gotten through in this presentation so far, but it absolutely does work really well and is just a grab bag of things that I really, really like. Now, the list has gone through, I think, 2 iterations after a little bit of testing in play, but the core of it has remained intact, and the core of it was generated by me opening up Army and just plugging in every model that I either liked or hated playing against until I hit 300 points, and then basically just filling out and adjusting from there. So what do we have? We have the full post-human package. We have Hawkwood with fire team bonuses. We have Andromeda, who is not necessarily fantastic, but I really enjoy, and a Garuda. Okay, we'll get to the Garuda when we get to the Garuda. So from the top down, we have Andromeda. 30 points ultimately for her is pretty reasonable. She remains to this day she's the original and probably the best large-based infiltrating guard model. There are a few other models in this category that are quite serviceable, but Andromeda has that really solid breakpoint of being able to do a great deal of damage and not costing a sixth of your entire army list. 30 points and 0 SWC is enough that you can accommodate that in a list, and if all she ever does is cordon off a part of the table and be defensive, that's not the end of the world. When she does go ham, however, the combination of the Zapper in particular and very dangerous guard close combat, like she's not a close combat expert, but she should never be taking a fair fight. You can roll up on something like an enemy heavy infantry samurai from JSA, for example, and if they do anything but like if they'll have to declare dodge, because if they don't declare dodge, you'll zapper them, and if they do declare dodge, you'll guard them in close combat and kill them with the DACW and martial arts. She's just really cool. You can try forward infiltrating her. Now she needs to roll a 12, which is not hugely reliable, but I would consider doing that in exclusion zone scenarios going first. And she just generally ticks all the boxes for being a really fun, and like fun in the sense of dangerous for your opponent, does a bunch of things, very cool, and she has cool mechanical interactions, which make her one of my favorite things to use in the game. We then have a 3-person fire team. Oh look, it's the Dakini and the Deva again, this time with a Denarbus joining them just to piggyback off of the link bonuses to get +1 special die on the Denarbus's picture. Now, a limitation of this list is that that's the only picture in the list, but you do have baggage. And there should be just enough hacking to make plenty of use of hacking without this being like an Asura style, really hacking heavy list. You want to use your single good KHD to go after enemy hackers, and otherwise just work hacking into a broader game plan. Now we then have 2 Lamed rebots. These could absolutely be netrods if you wanted them to and needed to save some points, but it is nice to have the hacking network in your deployment zone, and I considered the 2 points spent turning netrods into Lameds to be worthwhile, and a Shukra lieutenant. Now, by the standards of N5, the Shukra, which used to be just a gold standard lieutenant with counterintelligence and strategos, is a little bit expensive compared to what some other factions can get, but that's still an excellent combination, and he enables other things in the list really nicely. And we don't have that much choice in ALEF generally and Operation Subsection in specific, so the Shukra is just one of the good, safe LT choices. Now, rounding out this group, we have a Warcore, a Probot Evo hacker doing a lot of work in this list, and then finally a Garuda Spitfire. Now, I think if you put a gun to my head, it's distinctly possible that the Garuda, I would say, is my favorite single profile in literally the entirety of N4. The Garuda is the reason why I can't take any vehicles in this game particularly seriously, because if you want to see what the actual performance ceiling on high mobility plus gun is, it's the Garuda. It's not the GoPod, it's not the Red Eye. The Garuda clocks in at notably cheaper than all of them and goes absolutely ham. Now you can combat drop it. I have an Evo hacker in this list for Sister Jump if I need, but more often I'll just parachute it in off of the table edge because you can just pick a nice safe parachutist arrival point and then most of the table is just within striking distance in the first order because the Garuda, in addition to having a 24-inch range band Spitfire with ballistic skill 12 and mimetism, is movement 8 with super jump jet propulsion. And unlike all of the vehicles in the game, it's on a very mobile and easy to fit silhouette 2, which means you can find places to put it that you just can't for a silhouette 7 vehicle. Now this guy usually arrives on turn 2, but sometimes on turn 1, sometimes on turn 3, and every game I have played with this list, he has just ripped shit up. particularly if you allow a little bit of time for your opponent's defenses to unfold, right? For the hard ARO pieces to be drawn out of position, for the deployment zone defensive positioning to sort of fall apart a little bit, for models to move into the midfield. He just finds and takes shots that your opponent does not want to have happen. Because 10 inches of perfect maneuverability gets you places, including just into the air, that people don't see without looking for. The plunging fire opportunities, the ability to move around, take shots into people's backs, etc. Using the Garuda is just a power fantasy. It's probably my favorite profile in the entire game. Don't ever bother taking a fair fight with it. Always take shots if you can find them against people who are in the open or facing the wrong direction, and you should be able to do that constantly, particularly if the game state unpacks a little bit because of that ridiculous maneuverability. Combat Group 2, we then have Posthumans, and it's a full 3 Posthuman set. The Engineer, the Hacker, and the Forward Observer. The Forward Observer is actually kind of important in this list because you need like any extra defense you can get that sort of stresses your opponent's offensive resources and forces them to commit more, opens up more space for the Garuda. So we have the Hacker in the midfield being a hacker and a boarding shotgun, etc. Posthumans are just cracked in terms of their cost, like their value per piece. Basically every game, the Hacker and the Forward Observer will both die, but they will be so annoying for my opponents that they're completely worthwhile, and I still have the Engineer in the mag generating a regular order. We then have a Zayin Rebot, again, just more defenses, just really making sure that your opponent has to fight like a difficult fight on the first turn, and complementing that, we have John Hawkwood. Now he is in a Haris team, with a bounty hunter boarding shotgun and a motorized bounty hunter, although the motorized bounty hunter will usually just yeet off into the distance at some point during the game and leave them behind, but that leaves behind a pure duo, which gets +1 special die. Which means John Hawkwood has 3 special die in ARO with his Mimetism, Ballistic Skill 13, K1 Sniper Rifle. Now, as much as Hawkwood is just like a nightmare to fight and is even an effective burst 4 in active turn, although you really do start to feel on him the special die effect begin to add up, right? He can only ever score 2 hits in active, 1 hit in reactive, which means he's very good at winning face-to-face rolls, but he takes time to do damage. He won't just ace down a Yotum, for example. But he just saps your opponent's orders in reactive. He is, I will say, fairly costed, right? 36 points and 1.5 SWC. You get what you pay for with him, but what you pay for is possibly the most annoying ARO piece in the game. He is vulnerable to smoke shooting, and that's becoming more common, but at least for now, he is not being too aggressively countered by the meta, and he is very solid. And he's in the list because, as noted, this list is a grab bag of all of the things I really like that happen to be in OSS, and having played against Hawkwood and basically broken my face trying to put him down, he is a piece that I really like using. Now, the obvious, and it is an obvious weakness of this list, it is a significant weakness, is the fact that it has virtually no visibility control, like white noise, I guess, and that's basically it. And it's fairly limited in terms of its long-range gunfighting. You have a single heavy machine gun that you can give support where to, and the K1 sniper rifle, and that's kind of it in terms of your ability to suppress hard enemy arrows. That can kind of leave you in a position where it can be difficult to really deliver a long-range conventional hammer blow in your active turn if you're going first. You need to play a little bit more cagey and allow, like, do a little bit of damage, set up your hacking network, reload your pitches, etc. Do that kind of annoying stuff on the first turn if you don't think you can safely suppress enemy ARO elements with just your Dakini. And then pass play to your opponent basically and allow them to begin expending themselves, trying to do things like fight Andromeda and fight the Zayin Reborn, fight through the hacking and deal with the proxies, etc. Because as your opponent stresses their resources more and more dealing with your stuff, particularly your expendable stuff like the post-human proxies, or remotes that you can recover with an engineer, more and more openings begin to emerge for things like the Garuda, for example, to make best use of their various different tools, mobility, etc. This is a really, really fun list to play. It does come with that big caveat of you do not have super heavy firepower in this list. You need to be very judicious with it and accept that there are some things that you can't suppress. But with that caveat, it's just a collection of things that are hugely fun to play, and in the right circumstances just feel like absolute power fantasies. Now from here, we're starting to get into the meme lists, but as a reminder, this is a list of my favorite lists in N5, not the best lists in N5. Is this list on screen now good? Yes. Actually, it is kind of terrifying, but it is also a huge meme. Now, a quick note, credit for this list in particular goes to my good friend Ewan from Western Australia. Ewan is quite new to Infinity, and this is like the second list he ever wrote. that I have only very lightly tinkered with. It is possible that he is either a genius or a madman or both, because this is a triple tag Kestrel Colonial Force list. Now in this case it's probably easier if I just go through, but if you've been looking at the screen you will have seen what I see, which is that we begin with a +1 Order Tikbalang Lieutenant who is duoed with a Pathfinder Dronbot with Tactical Awareness. Now you might say, the Tikbalang, if he's in a duo, he'd have to break that duo to spend his lieutenant orders. And you're right, he can do that. However, we have an NCO in the form of the first of two Squallows, the NCO multi-HMG Squallows, who is duoed with a multi-marksman rifle Squallow, which means that even if you want to keep the Tikbalang in the duo the entire time, not to worry, we still have an outlet for those lieutenant orders. That gives us 3 tags, 2 lieutenant orders, and 4 tactical awareness orders in the first group, which coupled with chain of command from the magistrate means we have, even on the first turn, a 15 order combat group, with 3 tags in it. In any kind of a conventional engagement, that's absolutely fucking horrifying. Now the Tikbalang is a fantastic predator piece. We have the Squallow for doing things like maybe unpicking a little bit of midfield stuff. The sensor is actually really valuable, as is the deactivator in this list, like really valuable. And then while the Tikbalang can absolutely punch down into basically anything armor 6, frankly you could even use the Tikbalang to fight enemy main battle tags if you need to. If you need anti-armor duties, like you're fighting a Jotun for example, it's going to be the Squallow NCO multi-HMG that takes over duties. And he benefits from pure duo bonuses, which means he's basically a build your own ballistic skill 15 HRMC. Now, obviously, those 4 models represent about 2/3 of the entire list, so we're running a little bit light from here on out. We have a Magistrate Chain of Command with 2 Jackals in a Fireteam Haris. That is for counterintelligence and Chain of Command because we have a very active Lieutenant, very obvious Lieutenant, and then 2 Jackals just for extra orders because they become regular in the Fireteam. We then have a Tech Bee, in addition to being basically the only source of Gizmo Kit in this list because we have really slimmed down in order to fit everything else. There is no engineer present, but she does have a Gizmo Kit. She is also our source of Tagcom, which is just absolutely a no-brainer in this list. All of the Tagcom bonuses are very relevant, especially when we have this many tags. Next, we have a Fugazi Dronbot just for orders, and this is kind of an important addition and one of the changes that I made to the list. This is the addition of a Beast Hunter. Now, this is the only genuinely irregular model in the first combat group, and you will from time to time spend a command token or 2, turning that Beast Hunter's order from irregular to regular. Lord knows we aren't using it to reroll engineering rolls, because there's no engineer in this list. But that Beast Hunter is here because sometimes you just need a piece that you can YOLO at enemy defenses. Maybe your opponent has like an Ariadna kind of camo hellscape, and while actually the Pathfinder plus Tikbalang fire team is surprisingly good at unpicking those sort of defenses given time, like you can clear a minefield if you can just approach from total cover, sensor, deactivate, move on. That is time consuming. You have to approach that carefully with that kind of a fire team. Sometimes you just need to be able to throw a piece forward, and it is the Beast Hunter that is doing that in this particular list. Now, frankly, if I had 2 points, he would have been a Yamabushi, but the Beast Hunter is fine. Or if I had 2 points, he would also have been the +1 Flamethrower Panoceania variant. I did not have 2 points in this list. There was just no way to find those. So it is just the generic 15-point Beast Hunter, because sometimes you just need something that can move forward quickly and aggressively, if only to die and force your opponent to reveal things that you can then kill with the tags. Now, Combat Group 2 is obviously and necessarily extremely lightweight, but it is chosen with considerable care. We have a War Correspondent. He's a specialist. That's cool. Also a disposable ARO. Also a piece that can just spend 1 irregular order each turn moving forward until eventually on turn 2 he walks through a minefield, discharges certain things, makes a discover roll, and again opens up plays for the tags. And the Jackals, who are mine layers and just help give you some insulation, right? You can ARO with your tags in this list. You can just put both of those Squallows on ARO duty and be like, yeah, it's ballistic skill 15 +1 special die. You want to fight that? Go for it. But having just a bit more turn 1 insulation is very valuable, and because the second group is so lightweight, we need to have an outlet for its very few orders. And that means that the role of those Jackals, most games, is just to spend, over the course of 3 turns, 6 irregular orders spec firing. Now, will that do something every game? Absolutely not. Will it stress your opponent an enormous amount? Absolutely yes. And that stress will often cause your opponent to be like, well, I kind of have to go after the Jackals, I guess. But they're very difficult to go after, particularly if they're squirreled away somewhere, because they have boarding shotguns and boarding pistols, and they have the mines that they've laid. This is just for the very, very few points we had remaining, literally 25 points left after the first group was filled out. This is the best way to spend it, and it helps complement the list a lot. Now, in terms of ways that you could adjust this, I actually think, okay, look, the Pathfinder is committing to a bit. It's one more tactical awareness order so that we get to 16 orders. That's hilarious. But actually having the sensor and deactivator on that piece opens up like conservative but predatory attack runs with the Tickbalang team that you otherwise just might not be able to take. Stuff like midfield mines, including midfield electromagnetic mines, are quite common in N5, and being able to approach those from behind total cover, sensor to discover them, deal with them with a deactivator, censor whatever laid them, and then kill that with a tick-belang is very order intensive, although Lord knows you have orders in this list, but it gives you a way of just slowly chipping away at your opponent's pieces even when they're fully null deployed and not wanting to engage your tags. But from kind of a practical perspective, there is a little bit of an argument that, hey, maybe that Pathfinder, maybe you should find a point somewhere, and maybe that Pathfinder should be an engineer and a palbot. That is the more sensible version of this list, but I'm not actually convinced it's necessarily better, and who cares? This is a triple tag list. Like, we're not talking about sensibility here. This list ticks all the boxes of being a power fantasy and ridiculously annoying for your opponent, and having just so many orders in a single combat group that N4 Invincible Army players shed a single tear of envy. It is a very cool list. Yes, it is a little bit of a meme, but it is on my list of favorite lists in N5 for a reason. And finally, Vanilla O12, and we are fully in meme territory here, but it's just so much potential in terms of the meme that you can get. Now, a little while back, I made the commentary that I do not think there is a boarding shotgun +1 burst profile that I dislike in N5. And while I think maybe there are a couple in the game now that push that charity just a little bit, looking at you, Imperial Service Canron, the Razor unit was a regiment that I found looking for models with a +1 burst boarding shotgun, and then immediately went, oh, that's a monofilament mine layer. And so this list is built to ask the question, how difficult is it actually to get a kill with mine layer monofilament mines? And from the little bit of testing I've done, the answer actually is kind of tragically, it's actually quite difficult to get a kill with monofilament mine layers, because monofilament is one of those ammunitions that is inconsistent at the best of times. It is a single save, it is completely thwarted by a successful dodge, or by an opponent having immunity armor, which is quite common in N4. But this list lives for the day where your opponent just walks something into detonation range of one of those monofilament mines, and they fail the dodge, and they fail the save, and they shit themselves right there and then in the game store because a deployable mine layer weapon just took out a premium heavy infantry, or a main battle tag, or something. Now, have I had that materialize with this list yet? No. Actually, the most common experience has either been that my opponent has successfully dodged, or they've run at me with something like Penthesilea who has immunity armor and has done nothing. But the promise, damn it, the promise is there, and I will continue to intermittently play this list until I get that kill. Hasn't happened yet, but we all know that 80% of gamblers give up just before they hit big. Now, how do we make two Razor mine layers work? Well, like, they don't need that much making work because, yes, they have monofilament mine layer, but they are also a boarding shotgun +1 burst infiltrating mimetism 6 profile. You can always just have these guys reveal and move forward under camouflage and then just shoot things with the boarding shotgun. That's pretty good. Thumbs up. Anyway, but trying to make the mine layer element of them work, we have the first two models in each of the two combat groups are a Moonraker mine layer and a Razor mine layer. This gives us, even if the Razor's hidden deploy, which they often will, 3 Mimetism 3 camouflage markers, which just present a nice little defensive mix, some fog of war. Your opponent will know, okay, there's something going on in terms of what's under them. They will suspect mines, but the point is you don't want to telegraph really cleanly where the monofilament mines are. You want to build that fog of war, you want to have that depth of camouflage marker elements in order to give the best possible chance for the monofilament mine to detonate at the right place in the right time and get that kill. Now, Moonrakers generally are just ultra high value, but they're adding that little element in here. From Combat Group 1, after the Moonraker Razor, we then have a Gamma Fire Team. So this is a Lieutenant Gamma with a Vidocq Doctor and a generic Vidocq. This makes the Gamma an effective burst 4 ballistic skill 14 Feuerback, which is pretty good for suppressing even very hard targets. The Vidocq is also a Doctor, which means it's a specialist, which means it can bring the Gamma back out of no wounding cap. And look, frankly, for 15 points, the Vidocq FTO is no slouch either. Mimetism, Ballistic Skill, I want to say 13, Boarding Shotgun, Link bonuses, just watches the gamma's back and helps provide those duo bonuses. We then have a pair of Roadbot Paramedics. Now, these guys are as sweet and awesome as they've ever been, particularly with the Climbing Plus reversion to the Climbing Plus that we know and love from N4, but they are kind of the flex if you think you need to in this list. I think they're in there because they're about the best use of 40 points that I can think of. They can go and make a mess. They can be very annoying for your opponent to deal with. They're even quite good defensively. And they are very, very fast specialist, which is actually a little bit important because none of our midfield stuff is a specialist. So we kind of need the ability to aggressively move forward and do things like press buttons. Just generally very high utility. But if you wanted to flex things in this list, cutting one or more of the roadbots is a way that you could do it. For example, there is no hacking in this list. That was a necessary sacrifice. If you want to get hacking into the list, one of the ways you could do so, you have the SWC to find points you might cut the roadbot. You could actually fit, for example, a pair of Cyber Ghosts, one Killer Hacker, one Hacking Device Plus, for the points cost of those roadbots, and have, I want to say, 1 point spare to do something like upgrade a Varangian. We then have a 14-point Ment. This is very, very useful and almost not necessarily necessary. The Gamma is very durable, but we have an active Lieutenant, so just pay for the very cheap Chain of Command. 14 points is excellent. A single Kaita Flashbot, 7 points for regular order, and then the first of 2 Varangians. Now, we don't actually need Smoke to advance with this list too much, right? A lot of the things we might be progressing with are either very, very, very fast or have camouflage marker states, the razors, for example. But it's good to have a little bit of smoke just to get your roadbots across a gap. And more importantly, at least one of the Varangians should always be escorting the Epsilon in Combat Group 2. So Combat Group 2 is, again, a Moonraker and a Razor. Just as a note, in terms of if you are hidden deploying the razors, you want to have the mines that they deploy positioned kind of at the level where it's at the 20-inch mark, so that your opponent is not sure what has and has not been laid by a Moonraker, because the Moonrakers only have a forward deployment +8, but you should feel free to position the razors if they're in hidden deployment really aggressively, so that they can just drop out of hidden deployment, move forward, and start assaulting positions, because they are hugely dangerous on the attack if they can just close to within boarding shotgun range. Now, the Epsilon is our second big gun in this list, and he is a very, very good smoke shooter. He is also very single wound. You only want to be taking advantageous fights with him, but in terms of having a piece that can, for example, comfortably suppress total reaction thunderbolts, he generally just slaps a clean -9 on whatever he's shooting, goes to town, wins the fight, and then hides. There is a doctor in this list in the form of the Vidocq FTO, but much more of the time you'll just have something nearby. Like even the Roadbot Paramedic, the Roadbot will actually usually pick up a Vita Pack from the Speedball and then go and recover the Epsilon that way, rather than trying to actually, like, that's usually how you will bring the Epsilon back. We then have a Warcore and a second Varangian. Now we can dedicate one of those Varangians to assault duties. Usually it'll be the more expensive one because it's got a chain code +1 burst, but one Varangian should just always be hanging around the Epsilon to throw smoke. That's the main role of that, so that the Epsilon always gets those nice favorable gunfights. Now, is this a list with some gaps in it? Yes, absolutely. It can basically do any mission if you really need it to, although again, I wouldn't play this, especially wouldn't play this in countermeasures or highly classified, but you could potentially play this. You know what? Don't play this in Biotech 4 either. Exclusion zones will just be murder. But in terms of any moderately generic scenario, it should be able to play that, but it does not want to play in an exclusion zone because it's really trying to make use of all of that forward deploying stuff. So this list is absolutely a bit more constrained, but the constraint is the price that you pay for chasing that absolute high of the eventual day when I kill something with a monofilament mine. Now that day may not have come yet, but it will come one day because I'm not going to give up until I hit it big. Now that wraps up this video. Hope very much that you've enjoyed this. It was something a little bit different, but I think we're far enough into N5 right now that I can actually reasonably have a list of my favorite army lists, and I would certainly recommend all of these as at the bare minimum, very fun and enjoyable to play. Just as a quick channel plug to close out, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. Big thanks to everyone who has supported the channel so far. I take requests from channel supporters when I'm doing things like considering what to make video topics about, and your input is always super welcome. Now that wraps up the video for today, but I will be back as always next week with more Infinity content, and in the meantime, as always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.